Hey guys, first regardment here, and so I'll be talking about the new class for Space Marine 2 that's coming out in year 3, and to talk about this with me, I have brought on Jefficus once again. So Jeff, we talked a little bit before about like what we thought the new class in year 3 would be, but we have some new information now, so what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, Saber and Focus are really throwing a wrench in on what these predictions are because in the June community update, they basically state that they're adding the Absolver bolt pistol, a one-handed thunder hammer, which one can interpret to be something like a Crozius or something, right? And then they also say, so which class is it going to be? Is it going to be a Chaplain, Apothecary, or maybe Quiet Emoji, which translates to Judiciar, of course. But I actually kind of want to talk about the speculation can really be narrowed down because they have even said three different classes here. But let's talk about why it can't be something like, let's say, the Terminator, right? Like, why is that so unlikely?
Well, Terminators, they really function like as a normal Primaris squad. Usually come in as a Terminator squad and they deep strike onto like enemy ships or battlefields. It'd be kind of awkward to just like throw that into the middle of like your standard Primaris, like an aggressor and stuff like that. And I don't really think a Terminator fits the gameplay loop of Space Marine 2's map design right now that well. And really, they've never mentioned anything about Terminators, and they have with Librarians that we'll get into in a second. But I see a lot of people bring up Terminators. I just think that is outside the scope of this game for now. That would really deserve like its own section, or like perhaps even its own game, in my opinion. But what do you think about like a Terminator?
I think that it would be more fitting to have in its own game as well, or as a power up, or a one off operation, or maybe even a stratagem where everyone is wearing Terminator armor and that mission kind of becomes more of a just a beat 'em up where you're able to more easily clear it because you have crazy heavy weaponry. But one of the reasons why I don't think that it works is because I can't envision a Terminator in their bulky Terminator gear, just like rolling around, just like spamming dodge rolls. Like
It
to
would
me,
look
that
very
just seems
goofy.
so. It would look super goofy. It wouldn't really capture the spirit of what a Terminator is supposed to be. And I understand that there is already a Terminator mod where that is portrayed, but to be officially portrayed by Saber's product is not something that I feel like they want to represent because they do have expectations from Games Workshop that they have to follow. And that's why I feel like a Terminator would be just super unlikely. The second one is, of course, Librarian. And this is more of a gameplay thing for me. I don't think with the pace that Saber and Focus work at, they're going to release a Librarian with a brand new host of like four staves and four swords and all sorts of other very specific librarian focused weapons, not for a DLC or not for a patch update to the game. That's like a Space Marine 3 kind of thing in my mind.
I would definitely agree that the librarian seems like a Space Marine 3 thing. I mean, librarians, they make sense as part of a Primaris squad. Like having a librarian to support you, that would technically happen at least on some battlefields. But as far as the scope of Space Marine 2 is concerned, I think a librarian really should be saved for Space Marine 3 because, for example, let's say they launch a class launch trailer and they show all the classes we had in this game, including the DLC ones, and they're like, and there will also be the brand new librarian. They show off all those psyker powers. I think that would be huge for the release of that game, or as like a post-launch content for that game, and that would also probably fit into the scope of that new game a lot more than this one. And Saber has previously said they don't intend to add psyker powers to the game. Some people take that as like a guarantee we will never get a librarian, but things could change. But like you said before, with the workflow of Saber, it's a little outside of their current scope. So I think we should really like go to the next topic we have here, which is which classes are the most likely, with the first one being, I mean, a chaplain, because they have talked about that before.
Yeah, the chaplain definitely seems to be the leader in the running of the three classes that are the most likely, mostly because they're shifting their focus away from developing the great sword to the one-handed thunderhammer. And to me that screams that they have effectively worked on or captured the moveset of the Crozius or the chaplain's signature weapon. And it might be a little awkward at first to look into a class and be like, well, why would you design a class that can only use one weapon? Well, we've got 11th edition out now with the Space Marine Codex right around the corner. I would not be surprised if Games Workshop literally changed the war gear of the Chaplain to help Space Marine 2 and other future Space Marine games and products basically accommodate for different weapons. And we are starting to see this in a lot of different Warhammer 40k games where Games Workshop is basically working with these developers to try to accommodate lore and the setting to also try to work within the means and boundaries of their games. We saw this with the Skitarii Alpha Primus release in Darktide, where Games Workshop effectively gave Fat Shark a character that wasn't really fleshed out in the lore, or at least not fleshed out too well, and then they let Fat Shark just run with it. They basically gave them the character, and they're like, okay, this is yours now. Do whatever you want with it. I could totally see that happening for the Chaplain in Space Marine 2.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, we've seen them do things like that before with other properties like Warhammer Fantasy and stuff like Cathay for whole factions, where they did like let
Yeah.
games expand upon the things that were in the lore that like really weren't really that intricate in the first place. As far as chaplains are concerned, I think that having a chaplain for gameplay purposes makes a lot of sense. I mean, having a melee teammate that could buff your melee damage for your whole team and like spit out litanies, that would be a lot of fun for players. And also, since there is only one chaplain per company, that would mean players would be playing as Leandros, and I think a lot of players would love to play as Leandros in the game. It'd also be kind of funny to like fight a Hive Tyrant and save Titus as Leandros in like the operations mode. So I think that like it's definitely going to lean towards that class there as a chaplain, because they also mentioned before they want to see what they could do with the chaplain previously in an interview they did way back when. So I think chaplain for me, that's what I put my money on. But there are a couple other classes here as well that people have been bringing up over and over with the Justiciar and of course the Apothecary. And the first one I want to talk about here is the Apothecary, because this is like the #1 requested class beyond chaplain in my opinion, from what I've seen, because people want healing in the game. Healing perks are super popular in this game. Because of that, I think an Apothecary has always been a requested option. But what do you think about that?
Man, I did this week's hard stratagem where there's no contested HP. It's all just healing on executions, and it does not feel good. I don't understand where people are coming from when they are requesting us to go back to Space Marine 1's kind of combat healing system where you get health back whenever you do executions, because contested HP just feels so much smoother to me. But I can see where they're coming from a standpoint of like, hey, like we've got to grind freaking 25 to 50 absolute missions now. We got to complete 50 of these things per class. And like as a casual player, I don't want to go in there without having a bit more of a buffer. And although Space Marine 2 has kind of a way to cheese that, penance, or not penance, this isn't Darktide. Although Space Marine 2 has a way to cheese that, it's still a pretty big feat of strength to ask for someone who is a more casual player. Hence why people want more healing in the game. I think that adding an apothecary would be a great opportunity to take a look at the Vanguard and the Bulwark's healing and maybe change that utility a little bit. But for the most part, I don't really see it anymore, mostly because I don't even think Saber wants to deal with it. I don't think they want to deal with balancing another healer in the sandbox.
I think a
I don't
lot
know.
of
What do you think about
cases,
it?
Saber, I agree they don't want to deal with this. So like Saber is not a big fan of the healing perks in this game. It feels like, because they kind of break the pickup economy of the game a bit, which does not necessarily mean they're toxic to the overall gameplay loop for the player. Because in my mind, like when it comes to balancing healing, all healing is really doing for you is upping your margin for errors. Like it's not really actively taking away from another player's experience, like you would see with something like a grenade launcher that one-shots every enemy in the game, including bosses. That means your teammates don't have to play the game. With like an apothecary, your teammates would still play the game, they just have like a bit of an easier time. The big problem for me is that, like you said, if they do look at the Vanguard and Bulwark here and they're like, oh my god, we have to get rid of their healing perks, you could have the issue where players will have a huge backlash towards that, because once you give players something in the sandbox like that, they very rarely, if ever, like if you take it away. So for that reason, I think they would
The
probably
Helldivers
just
2 problem.
yeah, exactly. Because like once you if you
Hmm.
never gave them healing in the first place, they wouldn't cry out as much for healing as they would if you gave them healing and then actively took it away. So for that reason, I think that Vanguard and Bulwark would probably keep their healing perks. Maybe they wouldn't, but I'd be very surprised if that was not met with backlash because the big issue a lot of players have now already is that the healing perks in the game are so strong that they feel like they're necessary for them, especially newer players. Like they just think that without healing, it's impossible to get past certain content. So if you have an apothecary in the game, people are like, you have to swap to apothecary or we're kicking you. Like you have to swap to apothecary. Apothecary is mandatory for like yada yada yada. And because of that, I think Saber might stay away from that class a little bit. We did see a medic in World War Z a while back, but for the most part, I think that apothecary could be seen, but probably not in this next update for a class. I think it'll probably be like later down the line in like a year 4, year 5.
Yeah, and that's not to say that they can't balance it basically around healing, because they totally could. They could just make it so that it's like a biologist or something, where it's more focused on the debuffing aspect of the apothecary, and then maybe have like an aura or a team perk rather, where whenever you use a med stim, you just heal to full and clear a wound every time. Or maybe you make it so that the med stim becomes like a little bit of a AoE effect. So there are things that they could do to ensure that the healing doesn't get out of control, and to make sure that if it does bring some sort of support to the table, it is unique. But I just feel like when it comes to a gameplay perspective, something like the Chaplain or maybe even the Judiciar fits better for the sandbox of Space Marine 2. And what I mean is specifically the gameplay sandbox. So melee, ranged, contested HP, the whole 9 yards.
I would definitely agree. Like melee would be better for the game, like a melee-oriented class, especially after Tech Marine, where Tech Marine has all of these ranged weapons. And this also brings me to the final class here, which would be just this year. Now, we talked about this a little bit before, that this would be a greatsword class. You'd have the Temper Mortis, which allow you to slow down enemy range fire and potentially melee attacks, on top of stuff like the Absolver Pistol, of course. And I think this one might happen because we saw that emoji on their community update where they showed like, oh, what could the other one be with like a quiet thing? And these characters, just this year's, they have a vow of silence, and it also means they would save money on voice acting. So like, it's a pretty, appealing choice for the company, I'm sure. But I'm not sure if players would want it this year as much as they would want a Chaplain, because I think Chaplain just has like the pull for players that just this year just would not.
Yeah, my crackpot theory is that we're going to be getting the one-handed Thunderhammer much sooner than the Greatsword, and the Greatsword is going to be a 2027 release with the new class, whether it be Chaplain or Judiciar, and it would fit with the Judiciar much better than the Chaplain in 40k's current state, although that can obviously change if Games Workshop just basically changes the weapons and the war gear that chaplains are bringing to these battlefields. So I actually still heavily lean towards Judiciar, especially with this freaking silence emoji. This emoji speaks volumes. It's so silly, but it really does, at least in my mind.
They're
So
hitting towards
I
Judiciar.
would.
I mean, it could be something they do, but the thing for me is that I like you said, the one-handed Thunderhammer. I think that's coming out in like patch 15. We saw last year with
Yeah,
patch 10,
yeah.
they released a power axe at the same time as the anniversary patch. A new melee weapon to the game for multiple classes. That is a huge addition. So that coming out is like a big thing in an anniversary patch makes a lot of sense. I mean, the power axe is now a staple of Space Marine 2, one of its best weapons, and that was dropped with patch 10. So they probably want to like repeat that with this next one. But as far as a greatsword is concerned, we're probably going to see that as the next weapon after that, and maybe we'll see it as a 2027 release, like you said, and that would follow up with a class, I'd expect, but we'll see, because the one-handed Thunderhammer, some people have said, like, a Power Maul is technically a one-handed Thunderhammer on the tabletop as well, so for that reason, you could see something like that on the Crozius for a Chaplain. But as far as how this class would be received, Jeff, do you think this would be a bigger update than the Tech Marine?
So for this, I feel like we would need more hard data, because we're seeing all this Adeptus Mechanicus related stuff released this year. The Skitarii just released for Darktide, and it was Darktide's most successful DLC release ever. Dawn of War 4 is going to be getting Adeptus Mechanicus as a faction, and of course we know that Tech Marine was, when it comes to just peak concurrent players, it was the biggest update for Space Marine 2 in its post-launch support era. So I think that a lot of people are like Midstorm fans. Like they would love to see things like Sisters of Battle, kind of like Imperial Faith in games, and that's kind of what the Chaplain is there to enforce. Also, the Codex Astartes, of course. But there are a lot of Chaplain fans out there. I don't think that it's a coincidence that the 11th edition cinematic trailer featured a Chaplain as kind of the main character. Games Workshop, they are masters at marketing and they know their audience very, very well. So I wouldn't be surprised if it was the biggest update for Space Marine 2 so far. But man, the Tech Marine update really hit. There are a lot of Adeptus Mechanicus fans out there.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if we'll have something for Space Marine 3 in terms of info by the time the Chaplain or like whatever new class we have is actually released. Like you said in the 11th edition trailer, I think this is something that comes into play with Space Marine 2 more so than like a game like Darktide, is that it is very much tied to the tabletop of the game. The overlap
Yes.
of tabletop players and Space Marine 2 players is significantly higher than it is in Darktide, it feels like. So I think that it would definitely pull more
It is.
players from that audience, and Games Workshop must be aware of that, which is why they have pushed Space Marine 2 so heavily in its post-launch support, and also tied it in with things like AdMech, like you mentioned before. But as far as whether or not I think this will be a bigger update than the Tech Marine, I mean, the first class for a game is usually like a huge addition. Like Tech Marine was hyped up for like a year plus. Like we already knew this time last year almost that the Tech Marine was going to be the next class. In the case of the new class we're having here, we're still guessing. So we'll see what they do with that for like a hype train on it. But if it is a Chaplain and they do market it properly, it could be bigger than Tech Marine. And like Space Marine 3, or excuse me, Space Marine 2 in year 3 might be bigger than Space Marine 2 year 2 was, which would be pretty shocking because year 2 performed very well. But we'll see how the game's audience actually grows. We've already seen like a game that's already older, like Darktide. Like you said, Skitarii hit like peak 60,000 something players versus the peak of Space Marine 2 is like 35, 36,000 in patch 10 and patch 12. So we'll see how that actually goes.
Yeah, one of the things I was alluding to is that if Darktide were to get like a Sister of Battle type class, I think that Darktide would just explode in player count, primarily because I know that there are a lot of Sister of Battle fans out there. I don't know how comparable that is to AdMech, but correct me if I'm wrong, the Sisters of Battle have had their codex for a little longer than the Adeptus Mechanicus have. So I think that it would have a bigger following. Logically, I feel like it would have a bigger following. But again, we don't really have the data on that because a lot of these games, 40K games, they tend to focus almost exclusively on Space Marines. They don't really focus on a lot of the other factions. And then the ones that do, things like Speed Freaks, they don't really tend to do too well. They don't tend to do too hot. Something like Darktide is a little bit of a hidden gem, or Rogue Trader. They're a little bit of a hidden gem because they focus on these other parts of the 40K narrative that don't really involve Space Marines, but then they're also successful. So it is quite an interesting question, and a lot of this is really just a prediction game for both of us.
I think you brought up some great points in this one. If you have any final thoughts, you can let me know. But as far as any class is concerned, like I said, Chaplain is my best bet. I think that's what we're going to see as the next class in the game. And either way, this will be a hugely beneficial update for the game because a new class that is probably the most substantial content addition we've gotten so far in year 2, in my opinion. But anyways, guys, you guys can let us know what you think in the comments below the new class is going to be. I'll probably dissect this more in another video on the Well Played Games interview from a while back and talk about Chaplain there. But for now, thank you for joining me, Jeff. And as always, take it easy, guys. Bye.
The Emperor protects.